Welcome to Conversations of Hope, a podcast that shines light into the darkness of childhood sexual abuse. I am your host, Faith Ingram of Speaking Truth in Love Ministries.
And I am Michelle Viscuse from Journey Pink. We are both survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and we're sharing our healing journey to raise awareness and provide hope and support to other survivors.
We know what it's like to feel all alone with our secrets, but we also know what it's like to find freedom. We are breaking the silence that allows sexual abuse to thrive and using our voices to empower and encourage those who have experienced abuse.
Our goal is to create a safe space for survivors to find hope and healing in community. Thank you for joining us.
So today's episode, we're going to talk about what does healing look like? And Michelle, you and I have talked a little bit about how everybody's healing process is different. There's really no right or wrong way to heal, and everybody's healing journey may be different, but that doesn't make it wrong. And everybody's healing is different in the fact that some people may require professional counseling, and there's nothing wrong with that. And other people may be able to use a lot of self-helps and use support from friends, and other people, and they may not have a professional counselor, but that doesn't mean that they need a professional counselor or else they're going to go off the deep end, because we're all different and God's created us all different, and God has provided many different ways in which people can heal.
Right. Just like we all have a different story, and, the stories aren't the same, the healing journey is not the same. And so what worked for me may not work for you. What worked for you may not work for me. But I think the most important thing is to find God in that and let Him guide and direct you to the people that you need, to the support that you need, to the books that you need. I know for my journey, it was constantly letting Him lead me to the next. I wasn't always excited about what that maybe looked like, but when I look back now, I can see that He was clearly leading and guiding me. For example, I wanted to get a counselor, and I picked out a counselor, and I picked out that counselor because she had the Oaks of Righteousness Bible verse on her page. And I was like, she's the one. That's the one I need to see. And when I finally got the nerve up to call the next day, the lady said she's not taking any more patients. And I'm like, what? Oh, I finally got the nerve to call, and she's not taking patients. And she's like, but we have someone new here that you can meet with. And I just had my heart set on the other person. And I was like, well, that's fine. I'll meet with her and see how it goes. And she said, well, if it doesn't work out and then the other person starts taking patients again, we can always switch you over. And I was like, well, that's fine. I'll do it. And so I came in and I met with the new person. And after that very first encounter, I was like, she is the one. I am so thankful. Like, I felt safe with her, and I felt like it was going to be a good connection, but mostly she made me feel extremely safe. And a few weeks later, I got an email from the original one that I reached out to saying, hey, I'm taking new patients now. And I was like, no, it's okay. I'm good. And that's just one example of how I had it in my mind that this is what it's going to look like and this is what I'm going to do. But God took me down a different path for my own good. It ended up being a wonderful thing. So
Right.
it doesn't always go the way we think it's going to go.
And in relation to that, what you just shared, I know there are people that may start out with a counselor that they think is going to be the right one, and then they get into a couple sessions and they realize that there's something about that person that maybe is triggering. It may not be anything that's wrong with the person, but it's just not the right match. And people should feel comfortable in changing counselors if the person they're going to just isn't the right fit. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the counselor or there's anything wrong with the person seeking healing. It just means it's not a right fit for right now. And we know that not everyone can afford counseling, but a lot of times different communities offer free or reduced rates too. So it's important if you need counseling, but you think that you can't afford it, to reach out in your community and see if there are resources available to help you get the help that you need so that you're not struggling alone because you don't feel like you can afford to pay for the help that you need.
Right. And a lot of them will work on a sliding scale based on your income. They may charge you less. And the other thing I was going to say with the counseling is, even if, like for me, I could not talk about it. It was hard for me to talk about it even with a counselor. So another big part of healing and the next step for me was to have a circle of support, have a circle of people. Started out with just one, then it was two, and it stayed at two for a little bit because it was really hard for me to tell people my story or to talk about it. So being in that counseling session, feeling like I could trust her, feeling like she was safe, knowing that who's she gonna tell? I don't know anybody she knows. I wasn't afraid of, um well, I was afraid, of course, of sharing, but I just felt safe. So I needed that kind of space to get it out of me so that then I could share it with other people. And eventually, after sharing it with the first two people, I was just letting God lead me. And someone came up to me one time and was like, "Hey, can we do lunch sometime?" And when we went to lunch, I shared my story with her, and the reception was good and it was encouraging. And so every time I did that, I felt like there are now three people who believe me. There are three people in the world that know what I've been through and they still like me. They still
Mhm,
want to be my friend. And
mhm.
those were two huge barriers that kept me from talking because I was afraid if you knew my story, you wouldn't like me, or you may not even believe me. And so every time I sat down with another person and shared, um, it that circle of support gave me confidence and also just encouraged me to keep going. And I had a group after I would share, they knew I had, you know, therapy every Thursday at 10 a.m. I would text them on the way, pray for me, 10 a.m. Please pray. They knew what that text was about. But I only had 55 minutes in that room once a week, and I wanted to make the most of those 55 minutes. So I had people praying as I told my story. Not only did it give me confidence and make me see that I was believed and that they still liked me as a friend, they were now aware that I was in a battle to heal, and I needed prayer and I needed support. And they were there for me outside of those 55-minute sessions, because that's the thing about counseling. It's once a week, usually at, at most, and it's an hour. It's not, and you know, and I know you carry that stuff 24/7. You wake up at 3 in the morning with issues. So it's good to have a circle of support and people that you can confide in, and you get to decide how much you want to share. I didn't go into details with people the way I did in counseling.
Right.
So you don't have to tell everything.
Right, and I think some people have just kept things locked up so much that they don't feel comfortable, even with their trusted friends. They might share some, but they don't feel comfortable sharing all of the stuff, and I think that's where journaling actually can help because you can write down all of these things that you don't want anybody else to know, but you can journal them and you can get them out and process those. I know in the Bible, King David, when Saul was his enemy and he was being pursued by Saul, he got his support group, his mighty men, who actually were there to fight alongside of him. So, when you're in a healing, and that's not just the healing process, but that was when he was in the midst of the battle as well. But you do need friends, you do need people to stand alongside of you and to fight with you and to fight for you, because a lot of times you do feel all alone and you feel weak and you feel isolated. I know, my healing journey was different than yours. I didn't go to professional counseling, but I do have friends that are professional counselors. I went to a lot of different conferences. I did a lot of online research and books, which were like workbooks that you work through, and different support groups that I went through with other people. And one of the counselors made the comment, because some people believe that if somebody is a survivor, that they are really messed up and they need professional counseling, or they're going to go off the deep end. I mean, actually, my husband shared our ministry with somebody, and they would say, "Well, has your wife gotten counseling?" I took it like they think that I must be crazy and I need counseling, or I'm gonna, you know, do something really crazy. And this counselor says just because somebody has been abused and gone through traumatic experiences, it doesn't mean that they need professional counseling. If they are coping well and they're able to maintain a fairly normal life, they might benefit by counseling, but they aren't unhealthy. They're able to function. They're not unfunctional. They're not
Right.
disabled. And yes, there are things that the counselors can help us to go through the trauma, unpacking trauma and healing from abuse, because I think that's important. But we're not saying that everybody is so damaged that they need professional help, or else they're gonna go off the deep end. They've already survived. Most survivors have survived so many things that they are very strong emotionally and mentally, but sometimes they need help getting over these hurdles that are holding them back. I know one of the hurdles that holds me back is that I had built so many walls around me, and I just didn't trust anyone, because the people closest to me had violated that trust. So then you don't know who to trust. So you just kind of shut down. And that's where I was. So God helped me to start breaking down those walls of isolation, and help me to see, okay, I can maybe open up to this person, and maybe I can open up to this person, and maybe it's only one person that you can open up to, and maybe that's your husband, or maybe that's in a support group, maybe it's only one other person in that support group. You share general things in the support group because you're required to. You might have one other person, and God can actually expand your group of support, your support people. I still struggle with who can be my support people. Who do I let into that circle, because of the way that that trust was so violated when I was young. I felt like I had to protect myself, which meant that I just didn't share anything personal with anyone.
Right. And you mentioned the walls around our hearts. I definitely had that. And the other thing that I did was I wore a mask, because I did not want anyone to think that anything was wrong with me. And so I wore a mask to pretend like I was fine and that everything was fine. And when I started going to counseling, I was at a point where the mask wasn't working for me anymore. And I was really, really struggling. And so I needed help. I mean, I was still running a business and being a mom and being a wife, and I was functioning, but I wasn't able to hold it all together as I did in the past because the memories started bubbling up and I started experiencing, triggers and flashbacks and nightmares and night terrors. And so it was just harder and harder to deal with. And I distinctly remember being in the parking lot one day and one of the ladies from church asking me, "How am I doing?" Just casual, like, "Hey, how are you?" And generally I'd be like, "Great, how are you?" And I don't know if I was crying, but I remember saying, I'm just a cracked egg." Like, that's what I felt like, a broken egg, like I am falling to pieces. Um, and that mask was just like the walls around our heart have to come down, that mask has to come down.
Mhm.
And we have to be extremely vulnerable, which is really hard when you're not wanting to be vulnerable for good reason, right? Because
Right.
that trust was violated. And so I think being in a counselor's office or being with a trusted friend can help you break down those walls and break down that mask and take that mask off and say, "This is who I am. This is how I'm hurting." And knowing that they're still going to love you, they're still going to be there for you, they're still going to be there to support you and pray for you. That I think was pivotal for me because I thought I had to keep wearing that mask. And it was such a relief when I finally was able to say, "I don't have to hide it anymore. I don't have to hide the secrets anymore. I don't have to pretend like I'm happy all the time when I'm not."
Right.
Um, so just letting that go was such a relief.
I have a question for you. When before you started breaking down, before you felt like you couldn't hold it together anymore, at what age did that start to happen in your life?
Um, Probably 37 to 38.
Okay, because one of the books that I read was that a lot of people that have experienced childhood abuse, they actually start to realize that they need help or to deal with it. They start dealing with it in their mid 30s, early 40s. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I'm not a psychologist and I don't know everything, but I think part of it may be that God knows that we aren't ready to actually deal with all of the stuff from our childhood until we're at that age. One of the conferences I went to where they were talking about how your brain works, there's a chemical in your brain that actually kind of subdues bad memories. And as you get older, that chemical diminishes in your brain. So those bad memories actually can come up more. But I mean, God created us in such a marvelous way. I think, too, if I started dealing with my abuse in my 20s and dealing with people didn't really question my story, but they questioned my loving and forgiving just because I was dealing with the issue and bringing it to forefront. They were thinking I was being unloving because I told the truth about a person who had hurt me. And because they cared about the person that hurt me, then I was unloving and uncaring and unforgiving. And if I had faced those types of views of myself or when I was in my 20s, it may have devastated me, where in my 40s and I also had the support of my husband that was like, you don't listen to that because you are being loving. It's not being unforgiving to tell the truth and that type of thing. You can deal with different things differently. And things that would devastate you in your early 20s when you're trying to raise your kids and you're just newly married or whatever, you're dealing with a lot of different issues, then I think God protects us in a way so that we actually, a lot of us start our healing journey much later just because that's when we can. That's when God wants us to. And I think that's good too. I think what started my healing journey was I had never told anyone except for my husband before we were married. But then in 2006, my abuser also abused my niece. And it was that criminal activity of my dad that made me realize, you know what, I have to address what happened to me, even though it happened many years ago and it could no longer in my state be prosecuted in the legal system, but I still had to deal with it in my own life. I had to deal with what am I going to do with this now? How am I going to heal from this? How am I going to relay the information to my family, let them know what I know, different things. There's a lot of things, especially when the abuser is within the family. There's a lot of issues when you're going through your healing journey about who you're going to let know in your family. Are you going to tell your siblings? How are your
Right.
siblings going to react? Are you going to tell your extended family? And even like I know just because of our backgrounds, and I told you that I built up walls and I trust my husband, but even because I'm so personal and I kept everything to myself, I didn't even share a lot of things with my husband, even though I trust him. And that's because of, what had happened to me in childhood. It still affects who we are today. There are a lot of resources available, especially today. There are resources, you can find resources online. You can find support groups that meet in person and that meet online, different ones in churches. But again, you have to be careful that you're getting in the right group that is very concerned with confidentiality
Yes.
and they're very concerned on everybody, making sure everybody is safe. And because these issues are not easy, there's no easy one size fits all. Take a quick pill, everything's going to be all right. It's it's a process, and that's why I use the word healing journey so often because I feel like it is a journey. It's not like, okay, I'm gonna take this prescription for a week or a month, and then everything's
I
gonna be
wish.
okay.
Not at all. I mean, we're still on the journey. I'm still finding things that I need to heal from or things that affect who I am today because of what I went through
Right.
then. And so, but we just have to keep trusting that God's timing is good and his plan is good and that he's going to take all of that and use it for good and all of the ashes and make beauty from it. Just recently, I've grieved over wishing that I had been a healed person when I was raising my kids because I was very protective of them and very paranoid for good reason. I think I'm different now. And so there was a part of me that was like, wow, I wished I had experienced this when I was younger. But then, just like you said, I have to trust God's timing and I have to trust
Right.
that, and I can look at my journey. I wrote a book about my journey. I can look at each chapter and see God's hand moving me in a direction towards healing, and his timing was perfect every time. And so I just have to trust that
Mhm.
and, trust that his timing was good. And even though I mean, we all wish it never happened. I wish I
Right.
knew who the real me would have been had I never been abused. That's another thing. Like, who would I be? What would I be like?
Right.
What would my personality be like? So now the question that I'm asking is, how can I be who God created me to be in spite of the
Right.
abuse? Like, how can my personality that He gave me shine through
Right.
even with this background? So, and I
Right.
think part of that is doing exactly what we're doing, bringing it into the light, sharing hope with others, because we know what it feels like to be alone, and we know what it feels like to hide secrets and to hurt. And I just want to scream from the rooftops, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, you don't have
Right.
to live. There's
Right.
healing and available. Various forms, many different ways, many different opportunities, but it's out there.
Right. And I think that that offers people hope because there is hope that
Yes.
that we can heal from these wounds, even though they go very deep. There's hope for healing.
Yes. You are not alone.
We hope this podcast is a source of comfort and inspiration for those who are struggling with the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope and healing.
Please be sure to subscribe and check out our show notes for more information. See you next time on Conversations of Hope with Faith and Michelle.